I have a thorough feel for the voice, pacing, and structure. Let me write the news story. I want to be honest with you before I start. The story I'm about to write is around 5,000 words and will be long in the chat. Do you want me to go ahead and post it here in chat, as requested, or would a file be easier for you to copy/use? Just confirming, since you specified only in chat. Assuming you want it in chat, here it is. The smell of brown sugar and cinnamon filled my kitchen before the sun came up. I stood at the counter in the dark, stirring the sweet potato casserole I've been making every Thanksgiving since 1987. My hands knew the motion without being told. 38 years of muscle memory. Outside, November pressed cold and black against the kitchen window. Something felt wrong about this Thanksgiving. I couldn't name it at first, just a weight in the chest, the kind you dismiss as heartburn, until you realize it's been sitting there for months. The house was mine. I'd paid it off in 2009 after 31 years in the claims department at Midwest Atlantic Insurance. 4 bedrooms on Delwood Circle in a quiet part of Dayton, Ohio. I'd raised my son here. Buried my wife here, in the sense that this is where I came home to after we buried her. That was 2019, 3 years before everything started going sideways. I'd been peeling sweet potatoes when my son called. September 2022. Late afternoon, the radio on low in the background. Dad, Terry and I are in a situation. The restaurant isn't going to make it. We're 2 months behind on rent. I know this is a lot to ask. Come home, I told him. Both of you. Stay as long as you need. My son, Nathan. He was 41 years old at the time, with his mother's jaw and his father's stubbornness. He'd opened a farm-to-table place in Columbus with his wife Terry. The pandemic had hurt it, then supply costs. Then a bad location decision they'd made in year 2. None of that was failure of character. That's just how restaurants go. I understood. I'd seen enough insurance claims to know that sometimes life collapses through no particular fault of anyone. They arrived on a Sunday with a moving truck, 2 cats, and the look of people trying hard not to seem defeated. Nathan had hugged me in the driveway for a long time without saying anything. Terry had said, "Thank you, Don. We'll get back on our feet. 6 months, maybe 8, we'll pay you back for everything." I'd waved that off. You don't charge your son rent. I should have charged my son rent. Not because of Nathan, because of what Terry became when she understood I wouldn't ask for anything. The first 6 months were fine. Quiet. Nathan helped around the house, fixed the gutters, repainted the garage door without being asked. Terry cooked sometimes. We watched football on Sunday nights. It felt like family, the kind I'd missed since my wife passed. Month 7. Small things started shifting. Terry rearranged the living room furniture while I was at my Thursday chess game with my neighbor Ray. She said it opened up the space. I liked my space the way it was. I moved the couch back. She moved it again 2 weeks later and didn't mention it. Month 9. Her parents started visiting. Every other weekend, I'd come home from the grocery store to find Ted and Connie Brower drinking coffee at my kitchen table like it was their kitchen table. Ted was loud. He had opinions about my neighborhood, my lawn, my choice to drive a 10-year-old Buick. He thought everything needed updating, including, apparently, me. Month 12, Nathan took a management job at a distribution warehouse. Long hours. He was tired when he came home. Terry, still looking for restaurant work, was home most of the day, and she filled that time by filling my house with her preferences. New curtains I hadn't approved. A scented candle situation that made me feel like I was living inside a department store. A second television in the master bedroom, which was their room now. I'd moved to the smaller guest room without quite knowing when that decision had been made or by whom. Month 18. Nathan caught me in the hallway. "Dad, Terry feels like she needs more space to feel at home here. Maybe you could give her some room to make it feel like hers too." "This is my home, Nathan." He looked tired. "I know, Dad. I know." He went to bed. I stood in the hallway for a while, looking at the framed photos along the wall. My wife at the Grand Canyon. Nathan at his college graduation. Our dog Biscuit before he passed. My territory, marked in memories, and somehow it was dissolving. Month 24. Terry started calling it our house in conversation. I overheard her on the phone with her mother. Yeah, we've actually done a lot with the house. It's really starting to feel like ours. I painted the entryway, and we're thinking about the kitchen next. She hadn't asked me about the entryway. I'd come home to wet paint. Month 30. A credit card bill arrived addressed to Nathan and Terry Ross, care of my address. When I mentioned it, Terry said they'd needed to update their billing address for some things. Just easier done. You don't mind, do you? I minded. The indignities came faster in the final months. Being told the television was taken when I wanted to watch the evening news. Finding my filing cabinet had been pushed to the corner of my own study to make room for Terry's craft table. Being told, gently, that I made noise in the morning and could I maybe wait until 8 to start the coffee grinder. In my own kitchen. My hands worked through the Thanksgiving stuffing now, adding sage, adding thyme. The turkey was in the oven. Rolls rising on the counter. I'd been cooking since 4:30 in the morning. Nobody had come downstairs yet. Nobody had offered to help. Terry's parents were coming again. Ted and Connie. Also Terry's sister Jill and her husband Brett. Terry's college friend Donna and her boyfriend. 9 guests total, plus the 4 of us. 13 people at my table for Thanksgiving, and 10 of them were Terry's people. Nathan had mentioned this in passing 2 weeks ago. Babe wants to host for her family this year. I'd said, sure. I thought that meant Terry would cook. She had not cooked. I'd been cooking since 4:30. The doorbell rang at 2 in the afternoon. I heard Terry's voice brightening in the entryway. Ted, Connie, come in, welcome to our place. Our place. I was basting the turkey. I set the baster down, dried my hands, and walked to the entryway to greet people. It was my house. I was the host. Ted Brower stepped in, took off his coat, handed it to Nathan without looking at him, and swept his eyes around the entry hall. Terry, you've really done something with this place. Looks completely different from last year. Terry beamed. We've been working on it. I extended my hand. Ted, good to see you. Happy Thanksgiving. He shook it briefly. Dawn. Smells good in there. My daughter been cooking all day? Terry laughed. Dad. I went back to the kitchen. They arrived in waves over the next hour. Each time I appeared from the kitchen, Terry was at the door, playing hostess, receiving compliments about the house, the decor, the candles, the new curtains. Each time someone said it looked wonderful. She said we or our. Nathan stood nearby, a little detached, a little exhausted. Happy. His wife was happy. At 3:15, I carried the turkey out on the platter my wife had bought in 1994 at a shop in Vermont. Heavy white ceramic with a blue floral pattern. We'd used it for 30 Thanksgivings. Everyone turned when I set it on the table. The room went appropriately quiet the way it does when a proper bird arrives. Ted looked at the turkey, looked at Terry, and started a round of applause. Beautiful, sweetheart. You've outdone yourself. Terry accepted this with a smile and a modest tilt of her head. I stood holding the empty platter. Nathan met my eyes across the table for just a moment. He looked away first. Everyone, Terry said, clapping her hands together. Let's find our seats. I've set place cards. Place cards. She'd made place cards for my table. I found mine. I stood at the edge of the room, looking at the arrangement. My chair, the chair at the head of this table, where I had sat for every Thanksgiving since I carried this table through the front door in 1991, had a card that said Ted in Terry's neat handwriting. My card was at the far end, near the kitchen door, between Donna's boyfriend, whose name I didn't know, and an empty chair. I looked at the card in my hand for a moment. My granddaughter Maya found me. She was 12, Nathan's daughter from his brief first marriage, and she spent every other Thanksgiving with us. She appeared at my elbow, smart and watchful the way kids are when they grow up navigating complicated families. She leaned close. Grandpa. That's her seat. She gestured toward the head of the table. I know, sweetheart. Why is Grandpa Ted sitting there? She wasn't my granddaughter by blood. She was by everything that matters. She called me Grandpa because I was the one who'd taken her fishing, helped her with math, shown up to her school play in February when it was 13 degrees, and Nathan was working a late shift. I looked down at her. Sometimes you let things go just long enough to understand them clearly. She studied my face. You're going to do something. I patted her hand. Go sit down, Maya. I set my place card on the side table near the entryway. Then I walked to the head of the table, where Ted Brower had already settled himself in my chair, unfolding his napkin, commenting to the man beside him about the wine. I put my hand on the back of my chair. The conversation around the table slowed, the way sound does when people sense something without knowing what it is yet. Ted looked up. I said pleasantly, Ted, "That's my seat." The room went still. Ted laughed. He looked around at the other guests, smiled like I'd made a small joke. Don, Terry set the place cards. We're all just following the arrangement. I kept my hand on the chair. This is my chair. I've sat here for 33 years. I'd like to sit here today. The silence deepened. Donna's boyfriend put his fork down. Jill, Terry's sister, looked at the table. Terry stood up. Her voice was careful, controlled, the tone of someone trying to manage a situation. Don, we set the seating for a reason. It's not a big deal, okay? Just sit where the card says. I looked at my daughter-in-law, then at my son. Nathan's jaw was tight. He was studying his water class. It's not a big deal, I agreed. Then Ted can move. Ted Brower's expression shifted. He wasn't a man who liked being corrected. He was the kind of man who needed to be the biggest person in whatever room he entered, which worked fine when it was his room. This was not his room. He stood slowly, made it theatrical. Fine, I'll move. He picked up his plate and glass with an air of great inconvenience, moved 2 seats down, displacing Donna's boyfriend like a domino. Terry's face had gone tight and white at the cheekbones. I sat down. Said grace, which no one else had thought to do. We ate. The meal was good because I'd cooked it well. The conversation was stilted because of the undercurrent, the thing that had been spoken and couldn't be unspoken. Ted made a point of talking loudly past me, directing everything to Nathan, to Terry, making a show of ignoring me that was more conspicuous than just speaking to me would have been. Terry said almost nothing for 20 minutes. I watched her face across the table. She was building toward something. She waited until the plates were being cleared. Her voice was light, casual, designed to sound like it wasn't what it was. Hey, Don, would you mind starting on the dishes? The kitchen's getting a little backed up. The table went quiet again. I set down the serving spoon I was holding. Maya, across the table, looked up at me. I looked at Terry, then at Nathan. Nathan put his hand over his eyes. I got up, not because she told me to, because I needed a moment alone, and the kitchen was the only place I could get one. I stood at the sink, ran the hot water, looked out the window at the backyard where Nathan had played as a boy, where my wife had planted her herb garden, where I'd built a swing set in 1985 that Nathan had long outgrown, and I'd left it there too long after, because I wasn't ready to take it down. My wife's voice came back to me, the way it did when I needed it. She'd been a practical woman, no nonsense, sharp. She told me once, watching a neighbor's situation unfold from our porch, a man doesn't own a home just because his name is on the deed. He owns it by acting like it. I dried my hands. I walked back to the dining room doorway. Conversation had resumed, a little forced, a little loud. I said, Terry. She looked up. I'd like everyone to hear this. I kept my voice even. This is my house. I built my life here. I raised my son here. I've let things slide for 2 years because I love my son and I wanted to help. But I'm done being managed in my own home. Ted started to speak. I held up one hand, not aggressively, just firmly. Ted, I don't know you well, but you've been in my house a dozen times and not once spoken to me like a host. That ends tonight. Terry's voice rose. Don, This is incredibly inappropriate. We have guests. You are guests, I said. All of you. In my house, and I'm the host. The table was perfectly silent. Donna looked at the ceiling. Jill looked at her phone. Brett studied his napkin. Nathan stood up. He looked like a man in pain. He looked like he'd known this moment was coming and had been hoping it wouldn't. Dad, I looked at my son. Nathan, I love you. But this has gone on long enough. He sat back down. I walked to my study. I keep things organized. 31 years in insurance claims will do that to a person. I went to the second drawer of the filing cabinet, the one with the property documents. The deed, my name, my house, the utility bills, all 32 months of them, everyone in my name. The original mortgage payoff letter from 2009, the homeowner's insurance policy. I also took out something else I'd prepared 2 weeks earlier, after a conversation with my neighbor Ray, who had once been a real estate attorney before he retired. A simple document. A written notice of termination of informal housing arrangement, effective 30 days from the date of service. I'm not a confrontational man by nature. But I spent 31 years reading insurance claims. I know how people behave when they think nothing is in writing. I had everything in writing. I went back to the dining room. Set the document on the table in front of Nathan. I've given you everything I had to give. 2 years of free housing, free utilities, free groceries. I never asked for a thank you, though it would have been nice. I asked only to be treated with basic respect in my own home. That didn't happen. I looked at Terry. I looked at her parents. I looked back at Nathan. 30 days notice. I'd like you to make other arrangements. Terry stood up. She was shaking. You can't be serious. Nathan, tell me he's not serious. Nathan picked up the document, read it slowly. The guests began standing, the way people do when they understand that whatever is happening is not their business to be present for. Donna looked at Terry. We should probably. Terry said, don't go. This is ridiculous. He can't just. He can, Ted said quietly. Everyone looked at Ted. He was looking at the document in Nathan's hands. His expression had changed. Something older and more honest had replaced the bluster. His voice was flat. It's his house, Terry. He can do whatever he wants. I hadn't expected that. I looked at Ted Brower and revised my assessment of him. Slightly. The guests left within 20 minutes. Polite, uncomfortable, apologetic. Donna hugged Terry. Brett shook Nathan's hand. Jill said nothing and took the rest of the rolls. Then it was just the four of us. Nathan, Terry, Maya, and me. Terry cried. Not performance tears, real ones. This is humiliating. This is my Thanksgiving. I worked on this for weeks. I looked at her. You sent me to do the dishes at my own table. She didn't have an answer to that. Maya came and stood beside me. She didn't say anything. Just stood there. 12 years old and steadier than any adult in the room. Nathan held the document in both hands. He looked at his wife. He looked at me. His face was the face of a man who loved two people who could no longer be in the same room, and had no idea how he'd let it get that far. He said, Dad, I'm sorry. I know, son. He said it again, like the first time hadn't quite covered it. I'm sorry. They went upstairs. I heard the low murmur of arguing behind a closed door for a while, and then quiet. I cleaned up the kitchen. Put the leftovers away. Washed the good china by hand, the pieces my wife had kept from her grandmother. Dried them. Put them back in the cabinet. Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas. She'd come down the back stairs. She sat at the kitchen counter and didn't say anything while I finished. When I was done, I sat across from her. She said, Are you okay, Grandpa? I thought about it honestly. I think so. It didn't feel good. But you did it anyway. Sometimes the right thing doesn't feel good. That's what makes it the right thing. She thought about that for a while. Then, are they going to leave? I think so. Yes. She looked at the counter. I can still come visit, right? I reached across and covered her hand with mine. This is your grandfather's house. You can always come here. She nodded. I could see her trying not to cry. I let her take her time. The 30 days that followed were quiet in the way that difficult things are quiet. Not peaceful, just contained. Nathan sat down with me the morning after Thanksgiving, without Terry. He looked like he hadn't slept. He put both hands flat on the kitchen table and said, Dad, I should have said something long before this. I let her treat you badly because it was easier than the fight. That's on me. Not you. I poured him coffee. I know it's harder than it looks. Living between two people. He said, I don't know what we're going to do. I said, you're going to find an apartment and figure it out. You've done harder things. He nodded slowly. We sat together and drank coffee the way we used to before all of it started. He asked about my chess games with Ray. I asked about the warehouse job. We talked about his mother, which we didn't do often enough. It was an hour that cost nothing and gave back a great deal. Terry spoke to me once during those 30 days. A Tuesday evening, Nathan at work. She knocked on my study door, came in, sat in the chair across from my desk. She'd clearly prepared what she wanted to say. I want to apologize for how I handled things. I got comfortable here and I stopped thinking about how that felt for you. I didn't do it to hurt you. I just stopped seeing it. I appreciate you saying that. She looked at her hands. I'm angry about Thanksgiving. I want to be honest. You're entitled to be angry, I said. But you sent me to do dishes in my own kitchen, Terry. She was quiet for a moment. I know how that sounds now. How did it sound then? Honestly, it didn't occur to me how it sounded. And that's the problem. I respected the honesty. I didn't say so, but I did. They found a 2-bedroom apartment in Kettering, south of Dayton, at the end of the 30 days. Reasonable rent, close to Nathan's job. They moved on a Saturday. Nathan borrowed a truck from a friend at the warehouse. I helped carry boxes. Not because they asked. Because he was my son. Maya sat on the front steps watching the truck get loaded. When it was almost done, she came to stand beside me. She said, Is it weird that it feels sad even though it's the right thing? I put my arm around her. That's how you know you're a person and not a robot. She laughed, small and surprised. The truck pulled away. The house was mine again, in a way it hadn't been for 2.5 years. I stood in the entryway and just listened. No television in the wrong room, no scented candles, no one else's coffee mug in the sink. My house. I moved the living room furniture back to where my wife had arranged it. 3 weeks after they moved out, I had lunch with Ray. We ate at the diner in Wilmington Pike, the one that's been there since 1974. Booths with red vinyl, coffee in ceramic mugs, pie that holds up. Ray stirred his coffee. How'd Nathan take it? Better than I expected. Worse than I hoped. And Terry? He was quiet a moment. You know, I handled some landlord-tenant disputes back in my practicing days. I saw a lot of situations where someone overstayed a welcome and convinced themselves they had rights they didn't have. Usually ended ugly. Yours ended better than most. I cut my pie. That's because I didn't wait until it was ugly. I waited until it was clear. He nodded. And the boy? Nathan? I looked out the diner window. Bare November trees, a sky the color of old pewter. He called me twice last week. Just to talk. Once about work, once about nothing in particular. We talked for 40 minutes about the 1979 World Series. Ray smiled. That's a good sign. I think so. He said, And Maya? She's coming for Christmas. She wants to help me make the sweet potato casserole. He laughed. Full circle. I thought about that. The sweet potato casserole, the smell of cinnamon before sunrise. My wife's recipe. The Vermont platter. The furniture where my wife had put it. Some things bend a long way before they break. Some things, if you're careful and stubborn and honest about what you're owed, don't break at all. I paid for lunch. Ray protested. I ignored him. Walking back to my car, I thought about the conversation I hadn't yet had with Nathan. The deeper one, the one about what comes next. Not about apologies or money or the apartment in Kettering. About what we were going to build from here. Two men who loved each other and had failed to protect that love for 2 years. For different reasons, who now had to decide what came next. I wasn't ready to have that conversation. But I would be. A man who spends 31 years in insurance claims learns something about time. Not everything resolves in the quarter it's due. Some claims take a year. Some take 3. What matters is that the documentation is clean, the position is sound, and you don't surrender what you're owed. I drove home on Delwood Circle, turned into my driveway, sat in my 10-year-old Buick for a moment before going inside. The house looked the same from the outside, as it always had. White siding, black shutters, the oak tree I'd planted in 1990, that was now taller than the roof. My wife had picked the house because of the law. Said a yard that size raises children right. She wasn't wrong. I went inside, hung my coat, made coffee, took my cup to the living room, and sat in my chair. The real one, the one by the window, the one I'd sat in for 30 years, and looked at the room. My furniture, my photographs, my house. My wife smiled from the bookshelf. Taken at the Grand Canyon, 1998. She was 43 in that picture, same age Maya's mother was now, or near enough. I said, out loud to nobody, well, that's done. The coffee was good. The house was quiet. Outside, November was turning toward December, the way it does in Ohio, without drama, just steady and cold and certain. I had a chess game with Ray on Thursday. Maya was coming for Christmas. My son had called twice last week, just to talk. Some things hold. Not all things, not always, not without cost. But some things, the ones worth holding, hold. I finished my coffee. Took the cup to the kitchen, rinsed it, set it in the rack the way I always have. Then I went back to the living room and sat in my chair, in my house, in the quiet that was mine again. And for the first time in 2.5 years, I didn't feel like a visitor. I've thought a lot about what I would have done differently, not on Thanksgiving night. I know I did the right thing then. But earlier, years earlier. The honest answer is I would have drawn a line the first time Terry moved the furniture without asking. Not because furniture matters, because what it represented mattered. Every small thing a person lets slide teaches the other person what they can get away with next. I taught Terry, without meaning to, that there was no line, so she kept walking forward until she walked right into the one I finally drew. That's not bad luck. That's cause and effect. Quiet, patient, completely indifferent to feelings or intentions. I don't say that to be hard on myself. I was trying to be a good father. I wanted Nathan and Terry to land safely, to get back on their feet, to feel welcome while they did it. Those are decent instincts, but decency without limits isn't generosity. It's an invitation. And some people, not all, but some, will accept that invitation and keep walking until they've rearranged your entire life around their comfort. What I understand now, sitting in my chair in my quiet house, is that there are 3 things a person has to keep intact, no matter what else they give away. Their sense of what they've earned, their willingness to say so out loud, and their ability to act on it when the moment requires it. I had the first one. I always knew what this house meant, what I'd built here, what my wife and I had put into it across 30 years. What I lost, slowly, was the second and third. I stopped saying things out loud because it felt like conflict. I stopped acting because I told myself it would get better on its own. It didn't get better. It got worse in the specific, grinding way that things always get worse when you keep swallowing what you should be saying. Nathan knew it too. He told me so that morning after Thanksgiving, hands flat on the kitchen table, not quite able to meet my eyes. He'd seen it happening and said nothing because the conversation scared him. I understand that. The conversation scared him too. Turned out the conversation was nowhere near as hard as 2 more years of silence would have been. Maya understood it better than either of us, and she was 12 years old. She stood next to me that evening without being asked to, not because she'd worked out the legal or moral complexities of the situation, but because she could feel the truth of it in her bones the way children sometimes can before adults talk themselves out of it. I think about that. A 12-year-old girl with clearer instincts than the grown men in the room. That says something worth hearing. The thing about integrity is that it doesn't announce itself. It just holds, or it doesn't. Mine held eventually, at the cost of a dinner party and 2.5 years of accumulated discomfort. I wish it had held sooner. But I'm not a man who wastes time on wishes. I'm a man who spent 31 years in insurance claims, and what that work teaches you, if you pay attention, is that the documentation doesn't lie. What happened, happened. What you do next is what defines you. What I did next is what defines you. What I did next was take my house back. Set a boundary in writing. Give 30 days notice. Help carry boxes on moving day because he was my son, and that part didn't change. And then I sat in my chair, in my living room, with the furniture where my wife had put it, and I drank my coffee, and I felt like myself again. That, I think, is what resilience actually looks like. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a person who got knocked sideways, found his footing, and walked back to where he belonged.